Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me for our first online genealogy class of spring 2025. Tonight's topic is researching your female ancestors. And here is the link to the handout in the chat. Um, there we go. Okay, so the chat box is open. And just let me know if anyone else is having trouble with getting the handout. Oh, look, that's not what I need to do here. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we have a few points of business before we get going here. First of all, we acknowledge that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem, providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people, and is a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning, deliberations, and public engagement will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect, found in our motto, free to all. So as I said, the chat box is open. So just a few pointers. If you want to say hi and tell us where you're joining from, feel free to, but you don't have to. All chat messages during the presentation and the Q&A period afterwards should be related to the topic of the presentation. This includes all questions, comments, and any resources you may want to share. I also ask that you please be respectful of me and all of the other attendees. We've got a lot of you tonight. And I will do my best to make sure I get to everyone's questions during the Q&A period at the end. But if I can't get to your question before the program ends, you can please feel free to contact me afterwards. My contact information is in the emails you've been getting. So a couple of other things. This program is being recorded. I will be sending a link to the recording to everyone who has registered once it is ready. Everyone will also be getting a follow-up email from me tomorrow that will include another link to the handout, as well as a link to the slides and also the chat transcript. So if you miss anything, you don't have to worry, you will be able to catch up. All right, so for those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name is Jessie Wheeler. I am the genealogy specialist here at the Boston Public Library, and I work in the Research Services Department at the Central Library in Copley Square. So as I said, what we're covering today are researching your female ancestors, and just some of the points we're going to hit, and we're going to go over some research tips about how to do this kind of research, some useful records, including some that you may not have thought of using before. We're going to take a look at some related archives that you might want to make use of. And we're going to look at some websites that might be useful. And then we're going to go over some resources that we have here at the BPL that may be helpful. Okay, so just for researching in general, the research tips. So and this is generally good advice about anyone you're researching, regardless of whether or not they're a woman. Ask anyone still living who might remember them or might have any information. So that's basically step one for any genealogy research. Start with what you know, and then ask people, your relatives, friends of the family, ask them what they knew. So like I said, relatives, friends, neighbors, someone who worked with her, someone who may know more about them. You might have a cousin or something who has a collection of records, or who has the family Bible or scrapbooks, things like photo albums. And if they might be willing to share that information, definitely reach out to folks like that. And when you do get a record that you're looking at for this person, pay attention to the details aside from the name. There can be a lot of variations in a name, and we're going to get into names more in a detail in a little bit. But just generally, if the name is spelled wrong, or if it's a slightly different version of the name, if everything else is right, like for instance, the day they were born, their birthplace, their address, their spouse's name or relative's name, even if the name's wrong, it's strong possibility that it's the correct record anyway. One example that I like to use, which will tie in to the name thing, one of my great aunts was under a different name. Well, everyone else was the same in there. My grandfather, their parents, So I figured, okay, well, that must be her, even if because it's the right age, but then everything else matches. So related to that, if you're having trouble finding the person, look for primarily for married women, it would be her husband and or anyone else she might have been living with. She might have been living with another relative, so a sibling or an uncle, an adult child. It was fairly common, especially for widowed women, to move in with an adult child after their husband died. So look out for something like that. If they had cousins they were close to, they might move in with their in-laws. Again, it was also not uncommon, particularly for younger women, if their husband died, to move in with his parents. So if you know the names of all those other folks, keep them in mind as well. And so again, related to that, unfortunately, just because of the way records are organized, if you're still having trouble finding her, look for any known male associates. So she might have been listed as a witness in a court record, or she might be just in another record. So if she had some sort of, if she was like a witness to a will or an executor to a will, or she was just, involved in something, she was friends with someone and she was mentioned, keep that in mind as well. And again, just because of the way things worked out, it's helpful if you know the men she might have known. And we're going to be getting to this, but look at lots of different types of records, including we're going to go over some of the more unusual ones, but you don't want to just focus on a couple of basic things. You're going to, especially if this is someone you're having a lot of trouble with, you want to cast a very wide net. The more kinds of records you can look for, the more information you should be able to find. So getting back to the names for women, particularly in the before, like the 1940s, 50s or so, that can be kind of hard to find. They might be listed under their maiden name, married name, and nickname. They might be using their initials. They might be using their husband's name. Their name might be misspelled. So if she was ever married, you want to look for her married name and her maiden names, even if she was married multiple times. Try all of her married names. I was assisting someone with a research question once. This woman was married, I think, 4 times. So there was a lot of different last names to look at. She also went by different variations of her first name and her middle name and what I think was her confirmation name. So that was a tough one to track down. So you're going to have to keep in mind every single possible name they might have gone by. Going back to the example of my great aunt, I knew her as Claire, but when I looked the family up in the 1940 census, there was a Mary listed, and I was a little confused, but there was the right age. So I asked my mother, was Aunt Claire's first name really Mary? She said, oh, yes, it was. So that's something else to keep in mind, particularly if you're researching a Catholic woman who was born during the time period when a lot of Catholic women were named Mary. It's very likely that she might have gone by her middle name instead of Mary, like my great aunt did. That's just one more thing to keep in mind. Also, going back to the married name, it was fairly common up to a certain point for married women to go by their husband's name. For instance, my grandmother's obituary, the headline is for Mrs. W.F. Herman, which was my grandfather's name. She was mentioned by her own name later on, but I had to look for my grandfather's name instead of her name to find her. So that's another thing to look for, especially, if you are looking for an obituary or death notice, even if her husband predeceased her, she might still be referred to as his wife. So that's for married women, definitely use the husband's name. You might have better luck finding information about her than just by using her name. Okay, so for useful records, and again, there's some stuff that you might not have thought of. So, published local histories. So these are going to be histories of cities and towns and counties or states. Why this can be useful is they could have information about a woman's maiden name, or you might find more about her family. So even if you don't have information about her, if her parents are mentioned in there, that might be some good information. This is also handy, particularly for the early times, the colonial era, when most records, particularly of a death, would just have the husband's name. They might not necessarily have the family name, but if you know the maiden name, you can try looking for them there, and then you might be able to find more information about the family that way. And also some cities and towns will have genealogy sections. So they might have some family histories of prominent families in the area. So if the person you're looking for was part of a family that was one of the earliest settlers of a place, that's a good resource to look at. BPL has a pretty big collection of published local histories, and you can search for them in the online catalog, which is working right now. Yes, we've been having some trouble with the catalog lately. So you can search for them here. It's at the top of the page right here. So let's see. Okay, there we go. So other records you might want to consider, and again, these things can also be useful for just in general genealogy research, but these can be particularly handy for hard to find women. So things like directories and member lists, particularly for societies that are more focused on women. So for instance, I know I was able to find information about one woman because she owned a clothing store, and there's a trade directory for the garment industry. I was able to find a good amount of information about her there because she was the owner of one of the biggest clothing stores in the area at the time. So there was a lot of information about her there. So if she had a profession, if she owned a shop, there's a trade directory, professional directory. Definitely try looking them up there. Also, one of the few exceptions, city directories, women are generally not going to be listed there, particularly in the 19th century, unless they were heads of household, which usually meant they were widowed. The exception, though, is if they were in a quote unquote important profession. So any female doctors, they're going to be listed in there under their own names outside of their husbands. Some teachers will be listed in there. Sometimes that was considered important. So if you know of a woman who had a job that might have been considered important, she might be listed on her own listing outside of her husband. Women are also going to be listed in society directories. This is one of the few directories published at that time that would list women and men equally. So this would be things like the Social Register, which is still published, and also the Clark's Blue Book, which I personally like a little more because it's a little more equitable. The Social Register, particularly in the 19th century and early 20th century, would tend to only list the Boston Brahmin classes, the Protestants, people whose ancestors came to America really early on. They're not going to list more people descended from more recent immigrants or anything like that. One example I like to give is there was a mayor of Boston who happened to be Irish. He was very wealthy. He owned a very big grocery store business. He was not in the Social Register, but he was in the Clark's Blue Book. And again, he was the mayor of Boston. You think they want to include him in the Social Register, but they didn't because he was Catholic, mostly, and Irish. So again, why these directories can be useful, especially the society directories and the trade directories. They might contain information not just about where a person lived, but also their education. If you're a business owner, there's chances that they might have gone to college. They had an occupation. You might get more information about where they were born. So then you have another point of data to use. And this is particularly true in professional trade directories. They won awards that can shed some light on them. And then you can find the award giving body and then see if there's more information about them there. And also in things like the society directories, they would list club memberships. So that's yet another avenue to go down to try to find information. So these can be really good jumping off points to find different avenues to pursue. Another area you can go down is institutional records. So these will basically be, so the Eugenics Records Office was an unfortunate thing. It was not a great organization. Eugenics was a very popular movement, but they kept really good records. So that's why that's there. There's a lot of information about them, things like insane asylum records. So for instance, I have a relative who spent much of her adult life at the Framingham State Hospital. So if I were to pursue that, I could see if I could find any records for there. Also settlement house records. The settlement house movement was very popular in the early 20th century. A lot of them tended to keep really good records. The most probably well-known one was in Chicago, Jane Addams Hull House. That was one of the most well-known ones. And also tuberculosis sanitariums. That was part of a big movement, again, late 19th, early 20th centuries. People with tuberculosis would have been segregated and had their own facilities. They also kept records. So if you are researching someone who fit into any of these categories, that's another avenue to pursue. You can see if you can try to find these records. So these records, why they might be useful, because these are for institutions that were more than just recording a name and a date. They would have information about their marital status. They might have their maiden name, how many children they had, where they were born, and also if they happened to die while they were in these institutions, they would have information about where and when they died. For some of them, you might find a medical history, you might find their educational history, for instance, at settlement house records, places like that. You might find information about what courses they might have taken, job placements, things like that. And it's particularly, again, with the eugenics office records, they might have things like physical descriptions. So if you've never seen a picture of them, this might be a way to get an idea of what they might look like. And also, you might be able to find a religious affiliation. So that's yet another avenue to pursue. If they were part of a religion that had a really good establishment and kept records, particularly the Catholic Church. A Catholic Church tends to keep really good records. That's another route to go down. So if you want to read more about institutional records, kind of what they are and how to use them, the Massachusetts Genealogical Council has some information here on their website that goes a little bit more into more specific ones. There's a presentation here from a member of the council talking, using a case study of her grandfather's family. That's really enlightening. This will give you just some more context for what kinds of records these are. Okay, so another thing, newspapers. Now, a lot of folks use newspapers for genealogy research, and they're thinking just things like obituaries, death notices, maybe a marriage announcement or wedding announcement, funeral announcement, things like that. There's a lot of different things specifically about women that you could find there. If you go back far enough, this was more common during the colonial era and the early post-revolutionary era, so the 18th century. If a woman ran up a lot of debt, husbands would post notices repudiating their wives' debts, saying, I am no longer financially responsible for this woman. And sometimes you might get lucky and they'll actually have a description of them in there. So there were such thing as before, particularly this is still true in some rural areas, unclaimed mail notices. It was pretty common, and particularly, like I said, in more rural areas for everyone just to go to the post office. Everything gets sent to the post office, and you'd go to the post office and pick up your mail every so often. So eventually, if it took long enough, they would post a notice saying, this person has this mail waiting for them. So then you might get a good idea, oh, they lived around there. And if you see who was writing to them, what kind of mail they were getting, that also might give you more hints about their lives. Another interesting thing in newspapers, this is not too common anymore, are the women's sections. And things that would be included in women's sections, there would be lifestyle articles that would be called the lifestyle section today. So things about clothing and stuff like that, which can be really interesting. But why very useful for us is the gossip section, or the society page is what they called it. And yes, it was kind of gossip, but the things they included back then, a lot of it was so-and-so went to so-and-so's house for tea. So okay, they knew this person. I can try looking at this other person to see if I can find a connection to the person I'm looking for. Or they would say such and such was traveled to England with their daughter. So okay, I know they went here, and now I know another person's name, hopefully. So you will tend to see that more for slightly more well-to-do people, but if you look at some newspapers, smaller towns, it might just include everyone. It's really, I find it fascinating to look through these and see just the kinds of things that newspapers thought it was useful to include, and they can be really good source of information. So some of these things, particularly if you're looking at one of those notices from the husband, you can find information about the husband's name, what might be going on in their marriage, particularly if husband was mad at her saying, I'm divorcing this woman, I'm not paying her debts anymore, so you know information about that. You might be able to find an address and also just general information about their life. You might not get hard data about where they lived and stuff like that, but I personally think it's useful just to get an idea of what was going on in life, to get a bigger picture of the person, particularly for women whose lives often went unrecorded. Another avenue you can go down, which we mentioned briefly a little while ago, are women's groups. So things like this, there are various women's organizations, a couple of which are still active. Believe it or not, the Temperance Union is still around. Not quite sure what they do these days, but they are still around. And also, as are the Daughters of Rebecca, that's the female auxiliary group to the Order of Oddfellows. So Order of Oddfellows is one of the oldest fraternal, or one of the older fraternal organizations in the country. So these things can be handy because again, it's an organized group. They would maybe, you can find a member list, so you can find names, the ranks or offices. Sometimes it'll tell you when they joined, how long they joined, whether or not they came to meetings. If you get really lucky, you might get photographs, or if you get really, really lucky, they might say if the person died and they were well thought of, you might get a really nice write-up, in which case you can find a lot of information that might not be anywhere else. So just we're going to look at, we're not going to spend too much time looking at all of these, but if you know of someone who is in there, for instance, we're going to click on the Daughters of Rebecca. Daughters of Rebecca, because it is still active, they will have their own archive. They could just contact them directly for information. Some groups that are not around anymore. So and we're going to talk into a little bit more about how to find these. So the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. I don't think they're super duper active right now. They might have morphed into something else, but we're going to go into how to get those records later. But for things like the Rebecca's, they're still around. You would want to contact them. Another thing to keep in mind, even if there was a national group, if you're looking for a record about a specific person, chances are they might have records at a specific chapter. So, for instance, the Daughters of Union Veterans, they have what are called tents that are located, which is basically a local chapter. And so records about members of a particular tent would be held by them. I technically qualify for that, but they don't have a tent in Massachusetts, so I haven't done it yet. All right, so now we're going to talk about archives and websites. There's actually a lot of different archives that you can try going for if you know that they might be useful to you. Excuse me. So I said we mentioned before, the eugenics record office records. So the American Philosophical Society Library, if it's going to work for me. Their website has been going in and out over the past week, so I'm not sure this is going to work. And it's not really wanting to load right. Oh, here we go. Okay, so they have lots and lots of records. So this goes back to 1670. So they'll have lists of traits, they'll have pedigree charts. So if you have someone who is somehow got mixed up with this, you might be able to find that. They also have things organized by specific conditions. So you can see some things here that are words that we would not use today. So there's a lot of different things that you might be able to find because this was unfortunately a very long lasting thing, but there are a lot of detailed records. So that is one way to get some information. And so again, for groups like the Daughters of Rebecca, because again, they are active and they have been for a long time, they actually have a genealogy page. So this one, if you have someone who is a member of this, they go over very clearly how to find information. That's something you can check out if it's relevant. So those are for groups that are still active or but for most cases, if the clubs aren't still active, the records might be somewhere else. So for instance, the Young Women's Christian Association records, those are held by the Smith College libraries. This is going to load for us. There we go. So here we go. So this is the Young Women's Christian Association of the USA. So it covers from 1875 to 1975. So that's 100 years. So if the person you're looking for was a member during that time, there might be a record of her in here somewhere. And then you can see here, there's program records. So you can see what kind of programs they were going on. They have a collection of photographs. So if you get really, really lucky, you might find a photograph there. And also, as I mentioned before, the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. So this collection, it's mostly on microfilm. I don't know where the originals are, but it is a microfilm set that is available. And this will tell you where they are available. And of course, it's not working right now. Okay, let's try this one. Okay, it's not cooperating with me today. I can say I don't think we have this. I believe there are a couple of colleges in the area that do. So I think UMass Boston might have this. Okay, for general advice, like I said, I'm really just scratching the surface in this program. There's a lot of different things you can do. So there are a lot of, fortunately though, there's a lot of guidance out there because this is such a hard topic to cover. So there's one blog post that I really like that's really quick by Amy Johnson Crow, who's a professional genealogist. It's a pretty brief article that goes over 3 practical strategies, and also why I like her, she also records all of these. So you can also listen to this in addition, or if you're having trouble reading it, you can listen to it right here. It's one of the great things about this. That's why I recommend her blog to folks. And then there's also familysearch.org, which is a great free resource. So they have, in addition to their wiki with a lot of guidance and a lot of different record sets, they have a blog. And again, it is completely free to access all of the records. So as I said, the top tip that you're going to find in most of these is looking for the male relatives, but there might be other things that you can look at here. Another thing which trying to explore more, there is a database from Middle State Tennessee University, the Walker Library. All right, so for the people who might have arrived late, I'm just popping a link to the handout in the chat. So this database will have digital collections. You can browse by subject, which is what we're going to do in a little bit. So you can see they have photographs, they have programs, they have trade cards, they have books, they have articles, they have all sorts of interesting things all related to women's history in the United States. And they have some oral histories over here. So if you're interested in researching women from a particular area or time period, for instance, if you're looking for Holocaust survivors, Korean Americans, New Yorkers, it's definitely a great thing to listen to, even if they're not people in your family. Again, I always promote finding out more about the place and time in which your ancestor lived, because you want to find more about their life. So that's one thing I always recommend, and this is a good way to do that. Okay, so this is another website that I love called Cindy's List. So for those of you who are old enough to remember what Yahoo used to look like, and how it was basically a directory, a list of links and that under categories, this is basically that, but for genealogy. So Cindy is just one person. So it's a pretty massive website. Again, it's just by one person. So there might be a broken link here or there, but she's really good about fixing it, if you let her know. So here you can find out different categories of different topics. So for instance, if you want to look at suffrage movement, you can find resources on here about how to research suffragists from the UK, from New Zealand, and from the United States. So these are different things that you can look at. And there's also, let's say you want to find out information about schools, you can click on that. So there's a few different things you can look at there. So if you just, this is something I like to recommend folks look at if they're just starting out, because you can get a good idea of what is available out there. And this is another article by Amy Johnson Crow, who we just talked about. So this is some of the more unusual sources. So one tip I really like is look at the ephemera. So you don't necessarily want to stick to resources like we might used to be used to dealing with, like census records, official government records, things like that. If you find letters or diaries, this is why I suggest contacting, like if you have a cousin who has a whole box of stuff. It might not be well organized, but there might be some really useful stuff in there, particularly if you find someone's diary. Those can be really, really helpful. So another very important issue is naturalization. So I actually had a speaker on this topic a couple of years ago because it is very complicated. So women in naturalization has changed a lot. Naturalization laws have changed significantly over this country's history, and for women is especially complicated. I'm not going to go too much in depth into that. I definitely recommend you read this article from the National Archive that goes into it. Basically, one thing to keep in mind is there was a period of time where a woman just automatically became a citizen when her husband did. So she wouldn't have her own naturalization record. That's, again, said it a lot. I'm going to keep saying it. Look for her husband, particularly if it's a record like this. If they were immigrants, she might not have a naturalization record because she was married and her husband was naturalized. And that also changed. There was a lot of really kind of strict rules. Women could lose their US citizenship if they married a foreign national. There's all sorts of interesting stories about that. I think they go into a couple of them here. It's really, really tricky. So if this is the sort of record you're looking for, I definitely recommend looking at this article to get a sense of what you might need to look for, because what's available and where it is, that will depend very largely on when the event occurred. Excuse me. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some resources available at the BPL. So there are a few books we're going to take a look at. So some of these might be a little old, but they can still be handy. So especially if you're looking for legal things. So this one is The Hidden Half of the Family, called The Hidden Half of the Family. So this will tell you, this will give you, it's good because it's a good legal history. So this will tell you how the laws changed over time. For instance, looking at property laws, laws related to estates and wills and contracts, that can give you an idea of what might be available when. So again, I always advocate looking at the background of the time period of the person that you're looking at, so you'll know what you can get. And this is a good way to find that. This is another one. So this, again, called The Genealogist's Guide to Discovering Your Female Ancestors. This will just give you, again, go over some things we're going over now, some different resources that you can try looking at. Again, this is a little old. There hasn't been a lot published on this topic recently. Unfortunately, I've been trying to find stuff to buy, but there really isn't a heck of a lot out there. So this is another book that, again, can just give you some ideas about how to trace your ancestors this way. And these two I just thought were really interesting. So we have a book called Colonial American Doctresses. It won't apply to a lot of people, but again, I just found this a fascinating topic. So if you happen to have a female ancestor who falls in this category, you might very well be able to find a biography of her in this book. So that'll give you some more information. And also, again, another topic, American women in the Revolutionary Era. So if you are researching a female ancestor who lived during this time, this can be particularly handy. This was published by the Daughters of the American Revolution, so this can be handy if you're trying to join, if you're trying to fill out an application for them. So this can give you an idea of what kind of records to look for, because women, by and large, didn't fight in the Revolutionary War, but you can now claim descent through a female if they were considered a patriot, which generally means they supported the patriot cause in some way, shape, or form, usually by giving money or supplies. So this will give you some ideas about how to approach that. And we do have a whole book list. That's just a couple that I wanted to highlight. So there is a little bit more covering different topics. So this, so if you have ancestors who came on the Mayflower, you can try looking at that. And again, just some general history stuff, Irish women, and different things to look at, even if you just want to know more about what your ancestors' life might have been like. Okay, so next up, we are going to look at some research guides that we have. So we have 4 genealogy guides. We used to have 1, but we split them up recently just to make them a little bit more manageable. So if you go into the special topics guide here, and again, the links to all of these will be in your handout, and also you'll get a link to the slides tomorrow. So don't worry about missing this. So we have a section here on female ancestors. So this will basically go over everything I'm talking about now. And also a link to the last time I gave this presentation about a year ago, if you want to check that out. But also why I wanted to pull this up. So let's see, so records and resources is probably the most widely used one. So again, this is in general, but there are also things here that can be useful for researching women. So for instance, we were talking about naturalization records a little bit ago. So in here we have, so here's the window. So for naturalization records from 1855 to 1922, most married immigrant women, they automatically became citizens if their husbands were naturalized. So if you have an ancestor specifically an immigrant ancestor who was here around that time, that's something to keep in mind. And this will also just go into where records are kept for various time periods. And there are a couple of other research guides done by some of my coworkers that can also be helpful. So we're going to highlight here the list of residents. So the list of residents is exactly what it sounds like. It's a list of residents of the city of Boston. So these are, by and large, going to be drawn from voter registration rules. So women will not be here until the 1922 volume. So that's just something to keep in mind. But once women are in it, I'm just going to pick this one randomly and hope it loads for us. Okay, so let's make this a little bigger. There we go. So these are organized by ward and precinct. So here we go. Okay, so it's alphabetically by street name and then address. So you have to kind of know where the person was living. So for the first few years, they decided to mark all the women with this little dagger symbol. Not quite sure why they did that, but that is something that they were doing. So women are now listed in here. So it'll tell you this will tell you where they lived. It'll give you occupation for around this time period. A lot of them are going to be housewife, housekeeper, but some of them will have jobs. See, for instance, this person here, Mary, is a bookkeeper. So that's something, that's something else. There we go. So you can look at that. And why I particularly like this last column here, reported residents. So that'll tell you where they were living the year before. So you can kind of go backwards and trace where the family was. So for instance, this person here, the Mercurios, in 1922, they were at 5 Antrim Street. But the year before that, they were at 131 Orleans. So you can kind of go back, trace them backwards to see where they lived before. And this will also tell you their age. And why this gets used a lot sometimes is this will kind of give you an idea of what kind of dwelling it was. So for instance, when you have let's say, see here, number 8 Antrim Street. There's a couple different family names. So that tells you that this was likely a multi-unit dwelling. And probably based on the names, it was probably at least 3 different units. So this was probably a triple decker. So that's why this gets used a lot, because some people are trying to prove that they lived in a multi-unit dwelling or it was a single family dwelling. A lot of these are going to be multi-units. So that's another reason why these get used a lot. So yeah. Okay. So yeah, and there's a couple of other research guides like Boston Public Schools Historical Research. This can be helpful mostly if you're researching a female ancestor who might have been a teacher or was otherwise employed by the Boston Public School System, because we have, nope, that's not what I meant. Okay, there we go. We have the manuals, so that will tell, there we go, that's what I was trying to get to. We have annual reports for the school committee. But why I really want to show you this is for the manuals of the public schools of the city of Boston. Excuse me. And we're just gonna, for the heck of it, let's just pick this one. And by the way, a lot of the links in these research guides are on the Internet Archive, so those are completely free. You don't have to log in to use them. So let's just turn to a random page here. So what these would list would be, they'll have different information about the school system. They'll have different subject reports. So you can kind of learn what was going on at the time. But it would also list graduates at the beginning. I don't think they did this every year necessarily, but if you know a student that went there, you can figure out, oh, this is when they graduated. Okay, there we go. Also, the regiment was a thing back then. There was, preparedness committees and stuff like that going on. So you can find out, if you had an ancestor who participated in that. So that's mostly boys. Come on, there's the thing I was trying to get to. Okay, so I think I gotta pick a later year there. Let's try this one. Okay, oh, okay, I am on the wrong one. I apologize. Okay. So there we go. So that's the annual report. So that'll give you an idea of what was going on at schools. So what I really want to show you were the manuals. There we go. So the manuals will show you who was working at all the schools. It'll also give you addresses for the schools. It's organized by district and grade, by grade level and district. So this will tell you, let me make this a little bigger. So we'll tell you the master, so that's basically principal, submaster, so assistant principal, so assistants. Those are teachers, special instructor, that's a different type of teacher. Also it lists custodians, truant officers. So if you have an ancestor who worked there, why this is particularly useful, it tells you where they lived. So this Teresa O'Brien here, who was a teacher at the, at the grammar school in the Bremer district, she lived in Dorchester on 24 Freeman Street. So now you have an address, so you can go hunt that down and get more information that way. Okay, so we're also have a guide for directories. I mentioned a little earlier, things like the social register and the Clark's Blue Books, but there'll be more directories. We have information about the city directories. City directories, as I mentioned, they're not generally going to have women early on. Later on, I think by the 1940s or 50s, they were just listing all the adult women. Another key thing that to remember, children aren't going to be listed in anything other than the census. So if you're looking for a female child, the census is pretty much the only thing you're going to be able to find her. But this right here will give you an idea of what's available. There'll be links to things online. There is not, unfortunately, one single place you can get all of these online. The biggest collection will be the Boston Athenaeum. they have everything from 1789 to 1900. Their focus is on the 19th century. So they have all of those. There's some scattered ones all in other places, and Ancestry.com also has some of them. Probably, I'm a little biased, but the best way to actually look at these is by coming to the BPL and looking at them on microfilm, particularly if there's a specific year you want to look at, because it might not be online, or if it is, it's not the whole thing. Like, for instance, there are some volumes on Ancestry.com, or they only have the business listings, or they only have the first of 2 volumes. So it's not the best setup. So if you know specific, if you have a specific year you want to look at, definitely contact us. And there's a link here also to the social directory. So this is what the Clark's Blue Book looked like. For Boston, we have 1876 to 1937. Let's see where Blue Books. Okay, there we go. Okay. So we have these digitized a few years. Oh God, it was a long time ago now. Okay, so let's just pick this one. And again, most of these are on the Internet Archive, so even you don't necessarily have to go through us. If you just do a Google search for a book title, you'll be able to find it that way. So this is from 1915. So let's just pick a random page. So you can see here it's organized by address. So to list them by address, and you give you their name. Like you can see here, Mrs. Lydia A. Lewis. So she was likely a widow because it doesn't list her husband. And you can see down here, there's Mr. and Mrs. Walter C. So you need to look for Walter if you're trying to find Mrs. Walter. And then Miss. So you can kind of get an idea, okay, so she wasn't married yet. And so it'll tell you also, basically this listing is, it is just going to be the wealthy. And it'll also tell you who is staying, who is staying at the Parker House. The Parker House, the fancy hotels like that did have some semi-permanent residents, so you can get an idea of who was doing that. And also sometimes they'll have lists of, okay, so these are also members of a country club. So that's another thing you can do. So like, okay, so I know they're at a country club. These are the people in the press club. The society directories are a good way to figure out who was in, the fancy clubs. So then that's another avenue you can go down. And we're gonna look quick at this because it is massive. I said, hold on a second. Okay. We have a very large collection of newspapers, primarily in microfilm, but we do have a lot that is available in databases, particularly for the Boston area. Like I said, newspapers can be a gold mine. For instance, I like to sometimes, when I have some free time, I like to look through some of these databases for my relatives, and I found some really fascinating things about particularly what one of my father's relatives was up to in the 40s. It wasn't anything good, and that's as far as I will go, but that's another thing. If you have an ancestor, actually male or female, who was involved in some sort of who had run-ins with the law, chances are there might be mentions in the newspaper there. And this will give you an idea of what we have. So we are going to look at, so I like to highlight this one, and I will tell you why in a moment. So this is 19th century US newspapers. This is really useful, particularly, it does cover the whole United States, but if you're looking for the Boston area before the Globe was published, the Globe began publication in 1872, which is not very much of the 19th century. So if you're looking for before that, this is the place you want to go. Excuse me. Okay, so let's say I was just researching something about about John Hancock's house. So that was, let's just pop that in. There you go. So I pulled this up. So there's, like I said, it covers all over the country. We have results here from Carolina, Washington, D.C., seems to be in Philadelphia, all sorts of places. But why I like this one, click on this button here called Keyword Preview, and this will give you the context for the results. So that will, is this the right person? Is this something I want to bother looking at? Other databases, you have to actually click on the article title and look at the whole article to figure out whether or not it's useful. This one will give you a little preview right away, so you can figure out fairly quickly whether or not you want to bother looking at the article. That's why I like to highlight this one. So like I said, we have a massive collection of newspapers. We have a lot of different databases. We're not going to look at all of these, so I want to be able to get to your questions. So these are the biggest ones we have are the Progress Historical newspapers, the Boston Globe, the Irish Times, the Jewish Advocate, and the New York Times. So the Jewish Advocate particularly can be useful because sometimes particularly early on, the Jewish residents of Boston weren't necessarily going to be covered in the Globe. So that would be if you have Jewish ancestors, you might be able to find things like wedding announcements and things to do with Jewish social clubs, charitable organizations. They'll be covered pretty widely in there. And we do have a few other related databases. The one I want to highlight here is Archives of Sexuality and Gender. So again, this is more useful, I think, for context, which I've said is important. You want to know, if you want to know what was going on in their life, what issues they might have been facing. So these are 3 different archives, LGBTQ history since 1940, and sex and sexuality, 16th to 20th century. So this has a few different collections in it. So this again is really useful if you want to, just again know what the history of the time period that you're looking at. All right. So those are the end of my slides. I see we already have a few questions in here. I'm going to go in order. If you have a question, please feel free to pop it into the chat. Let me see. Okay, so Dee Bella's asking, if you get a chance, can you please talk about how to access a death notice for a non-relative? So a death notice is just something in the newspaper. You don't have to be a relative. I think you might mean death certificate. So if that's what you're talking about, so in Massachusetts, death records are public records, so anyone can ask for anyone else's. So, but the laws on that vary from state to state. So you would need to figure out what the laws are in the state you're looking at. But for instance, for Massachusetts, like anyone can get anything. Like if I gave you folks enough information, you could get my birth certificate. If you wanted to, they would give you a copy of it. So we're kind of spoiled here in Massachusetts because the records are fairly open. Other states are less so, or other states just might have different restrictions. So if you're thinking of death certificates instead of death notices, that's basically you need to figure out the location and what was going on for them. But death notices are just newspapers, anyone can get those. Okay, we have some folks from Western Mass. To see that, Middleton, Illinois. Great. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. Okay, let me see. Oh, Taiwan. Oh, wow. Okay, so Penelope is asking, my research is in the 1840s to 1900. Does that make it different? It makes it harder. Generally, the farther back you go, the harder it's going to be to find records for women. That's why it's unfortunate. You have to really look for the men in their lives, particularly by that time period. Before women got the right to vote, there really wasn't much in the way of official records for women. So that's why you kind of have to look for really different records. So the institutional records I was mentioning, things like hospital records, newspaper articles. Women would be listed in the census. So the US Census, everyone but the children, everyone's going to be listed in those, but that is only every 10 years. So it's only so useful. But yeah, researching for the 19th century is really, really hard, particularly if you don't really know much about them already. So that's another thing. It's really handy if you can have a relative or someone who might have like a family Bible or a diary or something, because you're going to have to really reach to find information for, particularly for the early 19th century. Okay, so oh, thank you. Hi, Maureen from Tiara. Okay, so we have a question from Teresa. Do you think the Belchertown State Hospital records are available? So if they are, they would be at the Massachusetts State Archives. One caveat, I should have mentioned it earlier. In Massachusetts, the record retention laws for medical records, I don't remember off the top of my head, but there is a limit where the record holders are allowed to destroy them. I think it's something like 35 years after the discharge or death of the patient. So that's something to keep in mind. There might be something out there, but anything that does still exist would probably be at the Massachusetts State Archives. So Maureen's asking, can you access church and other records easily? No privacy concerns. Well, again, that depends. So if you're talking about really old, like colonial era church records, a lot of those are just published in books. Like we have a pretty good collection from Boston that was put together in the 19th century. Anyone can get to those. The Catholic Church is kind of notoriously finicky about this. And that can kind of depend on whether or not the person you talk to is willing to help you that day. So it really depends. Churches are not, for this sort of thing, they're not bound by public record laws. They can basically do whatever they want. So you just kind of have to contact the right organization and hope for the best. One of the few things, though, that I can show you, let me get back to our, so on American Ancestors, which is a database. A lot of it, you can only use it at the central library, but they do have some free databases, and one of them, let me see if I can search my project. Here we go. Of course, they don't have it up here anymore. One of the free databases they have is for the Boston Archdiocese. So there is an ongoing project for them where those records are being transcribed, uploaded and transcribed. So the images, if you just want to look at the images, that is free. Let me see if I can. If you wanted to look at the transcriptions, you do have to have a full paid account or come in and look at it that way. But yeah, so that's one of the few exceptions, but this again, looks like for this Catholic Cemetery Association, they're only up to 1940. So it's really just through the 1920s. And again, that's just the Boston Archdiocese. I don't know if there are other dioceses or archdioceses who have similar projects with other organizations. This is just one that we have out here. So those are pretty much available, but again, it depends on the time period and the particular church or denomination that you're looking at. Okay, so so Kathy is sharing Family Search, which I showed you a little bit ago. FamilySearch.org has some records for Danvers State Hospital. So yeah, sometimes you might find different collections. They might not have wound up at the state archives. They might have been, for instance, I think, let's see, UMass Boston has the collection for one of them. I forget which hospital it is. But sometimes records like that will wind up at a college archive, or they might have been digitized. So they might show up in random places, but it's really it's a crapshoot really whether or not those records still exist, because legally they don't have to. Okay. So Barry's asking, what might be the best way to find out records for female enslaved women in the South? So I'm going to go back to the genealogy research guide for that, because there are a few resources. See how quickly I can get to this. There we go. Okay. All right. So as as I'm sure you're probably aware of this again. Researching enslaved ancestors can be a little tricky, female enslaved ancestors especially, but there are different things that you can try. So let's see here. All right, so I'm going to pop this as a link to in the chat for anyone who might want to refer back to it later. Okay, let me see. Okay, so like I said, so generally, so there are, I'm not sure how many women will be in it, but again, that might be if you know a relative, a male relative she would have been associated with, whether it's her partner, a brother, her father, if they were still connected, you might want to look for them. So there are Freedmen's Bureau's records, which are really the best resource for researching formerly enslaved individuals. So this was a project, this was put together right after the Civil War ended. So that's the best resource for that time period. For earlier than that, it gets a little tricky, but there are a few organizations that have been working on that. So there we go. So the UMC Greensboro has a digital library. Again, I'm not sure. The unfortunate thing is their names may not necessarily be recorded. You might get a basic description and maybe their age. So that's going to be really tricky. But if you're looking for the Northeast, there actually is a project. I forget what college it was, but there was a project. There we go. Oh, it was City University of New York. Okay. So the Northeast Slavery Records Index, if you're looking for someone in the Northeast, this is an ongoing project to transcribe records related to enslaved people in the Northeast. That's primarily, it's going to be New England and New York. And looks like New England, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania they have records for. So if that's the area you're looking at, I would definitely try NESRI. Otherwise, just take a look at the research guide. There's different societies that you can try contacting to try to get information. But as I said, that can be really tough, but particularly because the way names are not recorded. So again, it really depends on the time period. If the person you're looking for survived through the Civil War, you're going to have better luck finding them during that time period. Okay, so Stephen was asking for any internationally focused resources to search for grandmother from Canada and then backwards to Ireland. Okay, so you're more looking for immigration records, not so much specifically women. Let me see, and really it depends. So for Canada, there's actually a fair amount out there. Canada has every province has its own library. So if you know what province they came from, you would contact the provincial library out there. And for instance, I know there's a really good archive in Halifax. So if they came from Nova Scotia, they have a really good archive for genealogy. And one thing that this brings to mind is if you have ancestors from Ireland, a common way to come in would be to stop first in Canada and then go to the US, but a lot of them decide to stay in Canada. So there's actually a pretty big Irish population in the maritime provinces, so Newfoundland, Nova Scotia. So again, I would contact the provincial archive or the provincial library if you're going back to Canada. For Italy, that's a whole other class, and I have taught that class. That's again, you kind of have to know where she came from. It is organized regionally. There's different regional archives that you have to look for. And it's also very helpful if you can read Italian. So that's another thing. But yeah, that's pretty big scope. I do have a section here for researching Irish ancestors and Italian ancestors. So you can kind of just take a look at that to see the resources that are out there. Let's see. Carlene's asking, do you know of a way to find records about Gold Star mothers from World War II? So, I don't know off the top of my head. So immediately what comes to mind is maybe you can try looking Again, looking for newspapers. Oftentimes, when the news finally got to the parents about the death of their son, there would be a notice in the newspaper. And if they were memorialized in some way, like for instance, in the Boston area, hero squares are pretty common. It'll basically be intersections dedicated to the memory of a serviceman who died in World War I or World War II. So there might be information about that. So again, like I said, it depends, but definitely feel free to send us an email so we can look into that, because I'm sure there must be something. I just don't know off the top of my head what it is. So Anastasia's out interested in immigration from Greece circa 1910. So I don't know specifically what might be out there for immigrants from Greece. But again, you can try, we do have a section here, like I said, on immigration. So you can just look at that for general ideas. I will say mostly what we would have in the States will primarily be passenger listings. So you would, and for that, you have to have a pretty good idea, better idea of when they landed and where they landed. So I don't think there's going to be anything just for Greece. So again, you have to have, if you know where they landed and have a good idea of when they landed, you might be able to find an immigration, a passenger listing. That's going to be pretty much it. But if you're looking for records from Greece, they're probably going to be in Greece. There isn't a heck of a lot of records for Greece online, as far as I know. Okay. Okay, so Barbara's asking, is there a calendar of other webinars you're giving in the future? Yes, we do have this on our website. So if you go to, it's bpl.org/genealogy. And this is being slow. Coming out, there we are. Okay, so I'm gonna pop this into the chat. So over on the right-hand side here, there's information about genealogy programming. Not all of these are me. Some other branches are doing other genealogy things, like for instance, out of the Rosendale branch, there's a genealogy club that meets every so often, and there's an event in Mattapan in April. So again, not all of these are me. Some of them are some of my coworkers are running these, but this is where you can see all the different genealogy events we have coming up at bpl.org/genealogy. Okay, let me see. Okay, so Teresa's asking, are these newspapers accessible to folks who have the BPL, I think you mean e-card? Yes. Anyone who has the e-card can use the newspaper databases. Those are all available to be used from home. So if you live in Massachusetts, you can get an e-card with us and use our online resources. Okay, so Judith is asking, did they have or keep marriage applications in 1890 Massachusetts? So I don't think that's something that they have. Mostly what is available still would be the marriage record. So that would be what was registered with the marriage. I don't believe the applications for the marriage license were things that were kept. It would just be the registers, as far as I know. But definitely, so 1890, that would be at the state archives. But if you know specifically what town it was, the city or town clerk would be the ones that would have that. So that's the easiest way to get to it. But as far as I know, the license applications were things that were kept. It would just be the registers. Okay, so Maureen's asking, what are the best sources to learn about nurses in the field of nursing in Massachusetts from 1890 to 1910? Okay, so that really kind of depends on what exactly you want to know. There might be, I don't know if you're going to get as specific as Massachusetts, but for something like that, you might need to, look at some books just about the history of nursing in general, or if there might be a biography about a particular person. But it really kind of depends on what specifically you're looking for. You can definitely feel free to send us an email with, more of what you're looking for, and we'll see what we can find for you. So Brian's asking, does Ancestry own the rights to newspapers overseas? So Ancestry, they don't actually own the rights to newspapers. What they own the rights to are the images that they put up. But basically what they have agreements to scan these things and put them up. So I don't know how many foreign newspapers they might have. The BPL doesn't subscribe to their newspaper, to the newspaper section of their database, which is newspapers.com. We don't subscribe to that, so I don't know if they might have any from overseas, but again, they don't actually technically own them. They know, and again, I don't know if how available they will be again, because we don't subscribe to that part of the database. So I honestly don't know. But there should be a contact number for them to ask for. They actually have pretty good support. Let me see if I can find that. Okay, off question. Support center. Come on now. There we go. So if you go to their support center, I think there's a form you can fill out, or you can search there. No, oh, come on now. Oh, they're being annoying tonight. Okay, there we go. See, yeah, websites don't like to make it easy to find a place to actually find them, but there's a way to get in touch with someone there. And once you can get in touch with someone, you should they're usually pretty good about getting back pretty quickly. So Nadine's asking, were there any state or city censuses? If so, what years? So some states did do their own censuses. Those were generally done. It would also be every 10 years, but on the 5. So that would be, so the federal census would have been 1860. The state census would be 1865. Not all states did them. Massachusetts did them, but unfortunately, the only ones that are still in existence are 1855 and 1865. That's all that exists. There's a bigger collection, I know, for Rhode Island, because I have a lot of family in Rhode Island. So that's how I've gotten that. So yes, there definitely are some state censuses. They would generally be done every 10 years on the 5 years. I don't know which states off the top of my head. City censuses, Boston has done one every year for a very long time. But the list of residents is generally drawn from these days. So in Boston, that's every year. Again, that's going to vary depending on what city you're looking at. In Massachusetts, they tend to do that every year. If you're looking outside of Massachusetts, I'm not sure, but those are definitely things that exist. So those can be good places, particularly once women have the right to vote, you'll be able to find women in those pretty easily. Okay, so Carlene's asking, do you know if there is a way to know what ward of Boston Street would be in? Yes, there is. So for the list of residents, prior to, I think, 1980, you had to know what ward and precinct it was in because there was no alphabetical listing by name. After 1980, there is. Before that, there isn't. So my coworker, John Devine, who is the government documents librarian here, he put together this guide, which includes the Boston street list. So before the 1980s, so we're gonna click on this one. So you just want to look at the one that's closest to the time period you're looking at. And I'm going to make this bigger. So basically, it's really pretty easy to use. It's just an alphabetical listing of all the streets. So it will tell you at the end of the ward. So the first number is the ward, and the second number is the precinct. And particularly for the really long streets, you'd want to pay attention to the numbers. So this one right here, for instance, so Grove Street in West Roxbury, it'll tell you the length, where the street was at that time. So for instance, this one is Ward 20 and 1 to 381. So again, those are going to be, so when you see it like this on the left hand, sometimes it'll just say odd and even. So the odd numbers, so on one side of the street, So for instance, let's say in Griggs Place, the odd number is in Ward 21 Precinct 6. The even numbered side is in Ward 21 Precinct 7. So then once you get that nailed down, you can go back to whatever year it is you're looking at, find the ward in the precinct, and then the streets are listed alphabetically. So that's how you would figure that out before the 1980s. Okay, so Kathy's letting us know Danvers State Hospital records are restricted at Mass State Archives, yes. But I was able to find some of the same ones on Family Search. That's another thing to keep in mind. There can be a lot of restrictions for medical records. Generally, they're going to be based on time. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so Arlie's asking, I heard you on the 1800s being hard to find female ancestors. What about 1600s? Is there any resource in particular for records that old? 1600s are even worse to find. The colonial era, it is incredibly, incredibly difficult to find any records on women, which is why, again, if they're married, look for their husbands, because that's generally where they're going to be. The exceptions would be, and these would often be widows, if they got a license to run a tavern, it would be noted there in the town records. It would say such and such was granted a license to operate a tavern or to operate such and such business. So business owners will be listed in things like town records and selectmen's records. There was no census back then. So for that time period, unless they were listed in the town records for some reason or in the Court of Assistance records, so early court records, they would be listed there. So if they were involved in any legal issues, they would be listed in court records. But outside of that, it's really, really tough, especially if you're not looking for someone who was a property owner or a business owner, or someone who had a high standing. The regular women are really hard to find, unfortunately. So Linda's asking, where would I find divorce records around the Boston area? So the state website actually has a guide for that. No, that's not, there we go. Okay, so now that's not the one I want. So yeah, those are, again, those are going to be slightly more restricted than things like marriage records, but you can get some divorce records. So you see, there's a section for, oh, okay, that's not what I was looking for. Okay, so let's try. There we go. So yeah, but generally speaking, they're going to be at the judicial archives, which are at the state archives for early time periods. Later on, eventually jurisdiction changed. So for certain time periods, they'll be at the Superior Court. But from 1920, if you're looking from 1922 to present day, those are going to be at the probate and family court in whatever county it was done at. But those are definitely possible to get, but they are, the more recent ones are going to be a little more restricted than, things from the 19th century, but those are definitely things that can be done. If you're specifically looking for Boston, that would be Suffolk County courts. Okay, so Nadine is asking, does BPL have anything on Massachusetts cemeteries and cemetery records? Yes, we do. So again, it depends. If you're, especially if you're looking for Boston, there are a lot of published volumes of cemetery records. So those are actually published a lot, particularly if you're looking, and I can never spell cemetery right. There we go. Okay. So we have a lot of random things, like we have some stuff from Vermont, some stuff from Malden. So yeah, those are definitely things that exist. So these are going to tend to be the public cemeteries. Those records will be pretty widely available. Also, again, for the public cemeteries, most cities and towns in Massachusetts, they'll have a cemetery division that they oversee the cemeteries. So you would contact them to figure out records. For cemeteries that are overseen by churches, you would need to contact the church. And again, as I mentioned before, the Catholic Church can be a little weird about these things. They have a whole division to oversee that. That's divided by region. So if you're looking for a cemetery overseen by a religious organization, you have to go with them. If it's a public cemetery, like I said, most cities and towns will have cemetery divisions that you can get records from, because we don't have a comprehensive collection, but we do definitely have quite a bit, particularly for Eastern Massachusetts, but we have some things for other places. Okay. Okay, so Steve, it's just a follow-up to immigration from Canada and Ireland and also Italy. So again, I would just refer you to the sections of the LibGuide, the research guide that we have for Irish and Italian research, to take a look at those. New Brunswick, I think that Canada has really great resources. There we go. So there's a New Brunswick Genealogical Society, so you can definitely get in touch with them. Oh, that's not what I meant to. Provincial archives. There we go. Yep, and in Canada, they have provincial archives. So that's probably where I would start, is contacting the provincial archive, because they will generally have a good amount of genealogy information. And they could also tell you where to go to find stuff. Okay, so GW is suggesting, oh, yes, Ellis Island Records, there is a database that's free. You do have to register. Oh, and Pam has shared with us AmericanGoldStarMothers.org. I knew there must have been some sort of listing for that. So thank you, Pam, very much for sharing that with us. That's really helpful. I'll have to try to remember to add this to my research guide. So there we go. American Gold Stars Mothers. Excellent. Thank you so much, Pam. So it looks like, again, I'm not familiar with this, but just looking at it, it looks like you could probably contact them and they might be able to help you out. Okay. Well, thank you, Pam. Okay, Carl. Okay. William's asking, any suggested resources for researching Portuguese ancestors who immigrated to Massachusetts in the 20th century? So again, that depends on what exactly you're looking for. So there are a lot of resources for Portuguese immigrants who settled in Massachusetts, particularly areas like New Bedford, Fall River. They have pretty large Portuguese population. So definitely try the libraries down there, because that's where a lot of them went to. So they're going to tend to have more information. For instance, let's see. So one thing I want to mention, so if you're really stuck in a particular thing, there you go. So UMass Dartmouth has a genealogy collection. Oh, Dartmouth, there you go. So there are genealogical societies there you go, and there we go. So let's take a look at this. So there are genealogy societies for every location and background you can possibly think of. They could be ranging as much as their TR, which we have the Irish Ancestral Research Association, that organized to a Facebook group with people researching a common thing. So if you really get stuck and if you really need help, look up one of those folks, even if it's a Facebook group. So one thing that's common among people who do this kind of research is they like doing it and they like helping other people do it. So definitely look up things like that. Genealogy groups can be really, really helpful. There's hundreds of them all over the country. There we go. So there's this. So yeah, I did not know that they have that. That's cool. So again, but so it really depends on what you're looking for. If they lived in one of the places with big Portuguese American populations, definitely try them. Okay, let's see. All right. Okay. Okay. So Nadine's asking, once you find residents in Boston city directories, are there corresponding maps of each year? If so, we're listed. So there's not going to be maps, really. So the city directories, mostly the early ones, I don't know if they still kept doing this, they would have descriptions of the boundary lines for each ward and precinct. So it'll literally be lists of streets that would tell you where the borders of everything was. But there are plenty of maps out there. So there we go. So at the BPL, we have the Leventhal Map Center. So they have a lot of maps online. What I would really recommend, what I think, and they have a really useful tool called Atlascope. So we're gonna, let's see, come on now. Start at BPL. So why this is so handy. So you can see on the top here, this is an atlas from 1902, and on the bottom is, modern street map. So you can come here and you can get an idea of what has changed. Like you can see here, Copley Square used to be cut in half by Huntington Ave, which I find really interesting. MIT used to be not that far. So this is what I would recommend. Once you get an address, if you're interested in looking and see where it is, head over to Atlascope. You can, let me see if I can, oh, controls, here we go. So you can search for places. So let's say I wanted, does anyone have an address they want me to try here? Okay, let me see. All right, well then, well, I'm just gonna put in ours. Okay, you know what? Oh, I know. The Fenway, there we go. Okay, so so it'll take you to the approximate location, but one thing, this is why the street listings are helpful. Oh, so you can figure out what streets existed. So this, so it automatically, that's another reason why this is so cool. It automatically switched to another map. This is still from 1902, but it's a different map. So here we go. This is before Fenway Park was built. So if you wanted to, if you're a Red Sox fan, you can kind of look around here, see what was different. And so this part isn't too much different. These are still the Back Bay fans. Oh, there we go. Okay, so you can see right here, this is where Fenway Park would wind up 10 years after this map. This is 1902. At the time, it was empty lots. So people did own those lots. So like this was owned by George, Charles, Arthur, Dana, or the trustees of Dana Lands. So there you go. So yeah, these are the Atlascope. They don't have everywhere. They mostly, this is the only map like this that I know of. So definitely check them out or just contact Leventhal Map Center. Okay, so I think, oh, thank you. So Star posted a link to the New Brunswick archives. Thank you. All right, so we are just about out of time. So thank you to everyone who, oh, 10 Eggerly, so we'll do that real quick. Okay, so no, that's not do control. Okay, search places. There we go. Okay, so 10 Edgar 10 Edgar. There we go. All right, so again, so we're okay, so we're still in 1902. So there we go. So Turner. Okay, so it looks like this used to be Turner Street. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so in 1902, this was Turner Street. That's another reason why this is useful, because names changed a lot back in the 19th century and early 20th century. So there we go. So that's 10 Edgerly Street, 1902, and there it is in 2024. Okay, we really do need to wrap it up now. So again, thank you for everyone for coming. Thank you for all your wonderful questions. I will be sending everyone a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the handout, to the chat transcript, and also my presentation slides. And once the recording of this class is ready, I will be sending a link to everyone for that. But you could also keep an eye on the BPL's YouTube channel. It'll be posted there. Hopefully it'll be up fairly soon, but our AV department is really busy, so it might take a few days. So I hope everyone has a good night. And also included in the email will be some upcoming events. So we'll have that information for you too. Once again, thank you everyone for coming and have a good night.